Okay, hello there. It is July 28th, and we are AstroCosmology transit for the month of August 2025. I'm your host, Montgomery Norton, and I'm going to take you on this wonderful little journey. It's a big one, as is seems every month these days. We're going to start with a little bit of just technical astrology. By the way, if you like these videos, they find them helpful, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and shoot me an email. I'll put it in the description if you would like the transits for the month. I have them designated by day, the transit, and a brief description, which is what I'm going to go through with this video. But this will let you have it at home. You can print it out. I have mine on my coffee table, and it's like, what's happening today? Why am I feeling like this? And you can just pick it up, look at the date, read the transit, read a brief description, do some more research if you want to get even more detailed. It's just a great opportunity to kind of track and follow along with what's happening in the cosmos. So, hence AstroCosmology. So first, there's a minor trine that's happening. A minor trine is two planets 120 degrees away, and a third one 60 from each of those, like a little triangle. And it's Uranus, Pluto, with Saturn and Neptune in the middle. So Uranus trine Pluto, both sextile Saturn and Neptune together. And this is one of the biggest transits of this year. Next year, it actually goes into 2027. Because of these are slow-moving planets, they'll form these formations, these geometric formations, for long periods of time. And they affect us globally. They're known as, not all of them, but Uranus and Pluto are known as transpersonal planets. So they affect everyone cosmologically. It's not such a personal experience in the sense of the formation that they're making, but then it shows up for you personally in your own chart and how it affects the planets in your own chart. That's why an astrology reading is so helpful, because it goes into the details of how are the planets in their movements affecting your own personal chart, even your relationships, business decisions, life decisions, travel decisions. All this stuff brings questions, and the stars bring the information. So this minor trine, it's called, the one trine with sextile to both Saturn and Neptune at the top. The first one of these is happening at 1 degree. So each planet will be in the sign at 1 degree. So Saturn and Neptune, 1 degree of Aries, Uranus at 1 degree of Gemini, and Pluto at 1 degree of Aquarius. And this is happening from August 20th of this year until September 14th. This is the only one of those mini triangles that contains the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in August. The second triangle that forms is at 4 degrees, and it's happening from the 7th through the 31st of July in the year 2026. And then the third triangle is happening at 6 degrees of each of those signs from the 5th to the 17th of June in the year 2027. Excuse me, I always have to drink water when I talk. I'd be a terrible actor. I'd be like, cut, water. Anyways, one of my dreams still to do, but I even included in my transit document, which if you want, email me, I can send this to you. And I included 4 websites by an astrologer, Jessica Davidson. She's out of the UK, and she did like whole reports on this Uranus, Neptune, Pluto triangle that's happening basically between 2024 and 2027 is when we're feeling it. and she has 4 different website entries around this minor triangle. So it's a big deal. Uranus and Pluto are the change makers, right? So Uranus is this erratic change, electric change. It rules the internet, it rules electricity. Trine in a very harmonious relationship with Pluto, which is the underworld transformation planet. Bring the darkness up to the light. It's like a volcano. And these two are working together right now. And then you have Saturn and Neptune together at the top. Saturn will move on after this first triangle, but right now Saturn and Neptune are together in Aries, which is a profound transit. I spoke about this in my last report in July. But we have, Saturn is the construction, builder, rules, governance, society, and Neptune is the disillusionment and acid trip, mysticism, the fog, the mists of Avalon. And they're together working in Aries, the sign of the male warrior. So it's like we're putting form and structure to maybe what it means to be a spiritual warrior. And there's this sense of like the structures of society are becoming disillusioned. We're also looking at our addictions, our delusionment. It's a really profound time. And so the top of the document explains all that. And like I said, 4 different website entries by Jessica Davidson. You could find more too. You could just Google the minor triangle of Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune, which are all the slow-moving transpersonal planets, like I said. So then we'll get into the specific planets, which is ironic because on August 1st at 6:33 a.m., note when I give the times and the dates, that's like when the degree to the minute the transit in the angular relationship between the planets is exact. But you'll feel it, a few days before, a few days after. There's never just like an exact equation happening in our world, although sometimes it might feel like that. So at August 1st, 6:33 a.m., Venus at 1 degree 37 minutes of Cancer squares Saturn at 1 degree 37 minutes of Aries. Later that day at 1:48 p.m., Venus at 1 degree 58 minutes of Cancer squares Neptune at 1 degree 58 minutes of Aries. So you notice Saturn and Neptune are both at 1 degree different minutes of Aries, and Venus is moving from 1 degree 37 minutes to 1 degree 58 minutes. So the same degree. So it's basically happening at the same time. I'm giving you the exact moments when they're square. But I could have just wrote it as Venus squares Saturn and Neptune together. Does that make sense? Not like you can answer my question. It's rhetorical, but you know what I mean. So this is basically like the feminine feeling state. Venus in Cancer, right? Our feminine nature in the most vulnerable, most gushy, emotional. Cancer is like, I'm a total squishy mess inside, but with a hard outer shell to protect that. So it's our vulnerabilities. It's also our guarding and our protection, our boundaries. So this feminine feeling state, Venus in Cancer, is not enjoying the structures of male dominance, right? So Saturn in Aries, the structures of male dominance, nor is she feeling supported by the spiritual disillusionment, Neptune, of the male warrior who is not adequately defending her. Again, these are my descriptions. It's one interpretation of what I see in the planets, you can, at this time in our history, our story, you can just Google any one of these transits like Venus square Neptune, and you'll get websites full of information on this. So this is my little succinct description. I actually learned astrology before the internet, believe it or not. Yes, I am almost 50. Back when I was 19 is when I got my first astrology reading. And yeah, I was learning just from books and talking to other astrologers, of course. So back to the astrology. There's this amazing transit that's happening. August 5th through the 14th is like the crux of it, or the potency of it is happening. So it's a grand trine, which is 3 trines making a triangle, 120 degrees. And it basically, like if you saw it on the chart, it would be like, if you put a big triangle over the chart and there was 3 planets all triangulated. So the grand trine is Mars, Uranus, and Pluto. We talked about Uranus and Pluto. Then Mars makes that final triangle. And then there's a minor grand trine, which is the Uranus-Pluto with the Saturn-Neptune that we were just talking about. So the strongest point of this transit is August 5th through 14th. And Mars moves from basically 28 degrees of Virgo through 4 degrees of Libra, still in contact with Uranus and Pluto, who are at 1 degree of Gemini and 2 degrees of Aquarius. So they're not moving much. Mars will move about 6 degrees, and you'll feel it in that time frame. Just to note also that Pluto is retrograde at this time in Aquarius, so it's going back from 2 degrees, kind of reviewing the first couple of degrees. And I'll get into that more. There's a whole retrograde section on their report here in August. But as Mars is finishing up its transit of Virgo, 28 degrees, and transitioning into Libra, it'll form a trine to the Uranus-Pluto trine, thus making a grand trine in air signs. They're all in air signs, right? So mental activity, communication, verbalization, mental expression. Given that it's all 3 change makers, Mars, Uranus, Pluto, this shall signify a definite shift in consciousness and communication. Like, this couldn't be any more profound, right? So all air signs, all 3 change makers, making a grand trine in the 3 air signs. It's a big shift. And then at the same time, we have that minor grand trine with Uranus, Pluto, and then the Saturn, Neptune. And just note, I already said Pluto's retrograde, so is Saturn and Neptune during this time. So you're going to feel the Saturn, the Neptune, the Pluto, the Saturn, and the Neptune dynamics more internally rather than seeing it externally. That probably is a good thing, because, how much change do we want to see in the world happen all at once? There's a lot going on. So Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, all retrograde. Mars is at the peak opposite Saturn, Neptune. So I'm going to get into this now, but we have a grand trine and a minor grand trine, which makes a kite formation. Super rare. And of course, super rare with these big planets, or the transpersonal planets, the ones that move slow. So Mars is at the peak of the grand trine, Saturn and Neptune opposite at the peak of the minor grand trine, and Uranus and Pluto making up the sides of the kite. This formation is associated with fate or destiny. The other 3 planets, Uranus, Pluto, and in this case it's actually 4 because it's Uranus and Saturn together, are working to develop Mars, which is wild, right? All this maleness going on. There's plenty of Venus stuff going on too, but so this kite aspect is Mars at 1 degree. Libra, excuse me. Just double checking that. So we have Mars at 1 degree Libra, opposite Saturn and Neptune at 1 degree Aries, sextile Pluto at 2 degrees of Aquarius, and Uranus at 1 degree of Gemini. Three air signs, Saturn, Neptune, and fire Aries. So just add a little more heat into the topic of conversation. So a kite formation in astrology is made up, like I said, grand trine and mini grand trine. Plus that opposition between Mars and Saturn, Neptune over here. Whereas both, or better, all three of these planets are being supported by the sextiles and trines to Pluto and Uranus, the opposition creates the dynamic tension to actualize the otherwise harmonious configurations. So, okay, and I wrote all this stuff and I'm like reading it because there's just way too much information. You kind of have to put it down beforehand, otherwise your brain will just explode. Anyways, that's why it's great to get these notes from me, because then you can actually read it rather than just hearing it from me. So whereas Pluto, Uranus are both sextile Saturn and Neptune, and Pluto, Uranus are both trine Mars, those are all supportive relationships on the boundaries, on the outside. But this opposition between Mars and Saturn, Neptune, is this like polarizing evolutionary experience. When Mars, like I said, transitions from Virgo to Libra, our collective masculine is shifting from a focus on health, work, and service into getting along in relationships. So the masculine dynamic is going to be starting to understand what is a man's role in relationships, hopefully. And that's kind of a positive slant on it. It could be negative slant. But that's going to be the focus. It's really going to be, what does Mars and Libra mean, is the focus of this kite. So this evolutionary step being made by Saturn and Neptune transiting together in Aries, which of course is ruled by Mars, right? So Mars is opposite Saturn and Neptune, but Saturn and Neptune are in Aries, which is ruled by Mars. So you have this polarizing dynamic in its own sign, or Saturn and Neptune in the sign of Mars, which is in Libra. So this further reinforces the focus on Mars, right? While releasing the energy and tension through Saturn and Neptune in Aries. The two outer planets, Uranus and Pluto, can be thought of as the way to release the conflict present in the opposition. This formation speaks to the collective challenge that we are facing between the liberated masculine, who chooses how to define relationships, Mars and Libra, versus the spiritual and aspirational structures of society imposed on that rogue warrior, Saturn and Neptune and Aries. All the while, some major shifts, changes, and transformations are occurring with the new placements of Uranus and Gemini, which I have in parentheses, the ideal evolution of the mind and communication, and Pluto and Aquarius, which in parentheses, the transformation of utopian society, unearthing the power struggles around everyone's place in the matrix. Yeah, just let that sit for a second. I mean, these are like Matrix times. Y'all remember seeing that movie? I remember 1999 in Seattle. I was on a road trip and I happened to land in Seattle after being in Montana for a wedding. So I drove my Volkswagen bus from Southern California to Montana for a wedding and, just a fun trip, over to Seattle, saw The Matrix when it first came out in the theater, blew the doors off my mind. I had just left Esalen after 2 years, and then drove from Seattle back down to Orange County. It was quite a trip, 2-week trip in a Volkswagen bus, 1971, vertical pop top, all red, white top. It was a trip. Anyways, back to the astrology. So August 6th, 4:24 p.m., Mars enters Libra. We were just talking about that. The kite formation, I was saying August 5th through the 14th. Mars doesn't actually hit Libra until August 6th, but it'll be involved in that kite formation for 9-10 days. So Mars into Libra, our energy and our motivation, our collective masculine is shifting into the realms of relationships. Focus on compromise, getting along. It could also, bring up kind of conflict in relationship. Mars is often known as the conflict planet, triggering issues, and the energy is it's driven, it's punctuated, it's penetrating. So that energy comes into our relationships. Same time, 2 hours later, same day, August 6th, 6:18 p.m., Sun in Leo, 14 degrees, 49 minutes, so almost 15 degrees, squares Lilith in Scorpio. Our collective attention, the Sun, is always like a focus of our attention. What should we be looking at? What should we be focused on? Mercury is the mind, so it's not necessarily mental activity. The Sun is supposed to govern the heart. So it's, what is our heart focused on? And our awareness is in a square to Lilith. So it's in a conflict with the empowered feminine. And what does that mean, right? So these transits reflect back to us these energies for us to deal with on a collective basis. And, of course, on a personal basis. How does it affect your own personal birth chart or your own life? So August 8th, 11:44 a.m., Mars, 1 degree of Libra, 7 minutes. If you don't know, each degree of the 360 degrees in the astrology chart has 60 minutes within it. So it's even more exact calculation. It's here nor there at this point. If you know astrology, then you'll think about it, and you'll start to understand the exactness of these transits. But it's more about, how do we feel them in our own lives, right? Or collectively. So Mars is at 1 degree Libra, and it's trining 120 degrees from Uranus at 1 degree Gemini. And this showed up in that kite formation, right? So Mars was at the peak, Uranus and Pluto were forming the other aspects of the trine. So it's basically like our drive is electrified, unpredictable, unconventional, and possibly radical. Men's behavior might feel this way, right? Also, it could be higher order thinking by the masculine in relationship. Men might suddenly get an insight into the dynamics or the value of relationships. August 8th, same day, 7:51 p.m., Mars makes an opposition to Saturn. Again, we talked about that in the kite formation. It's exact on August 8th at 7:51 p.m. And then on August 9th at 3:12 p.m., it's an exact opposition to Neptune. So Saturn and Neptune are just 30 degrees apart. And so the exact, but we're going to feel it all that whole time from August 5th through the 14th, basically. And I describe this as then there's a clash between the masculine dynamic in our structures and rules in society. Although the male is feeling liberated, Mars in Libra, and wanting to be dominant in relationships, his independence needs to stay in check, Saturn, and constrained by the rules, laws, and authority. At the same time, the masculine dynamic in relationship is feeling the disillusionment of the warrior. Society. I can talk a lot about that, but what is it to be male right now? It's a real time for the reckoning of the warrior, the male warrior. And are we going to, as a society and as individuals, transition into becoming spiritual warriors and having integrity and responsibility to, society? That was my own little interlude. The fog of war, mental Mars is checked by the spiritual illusions of the warrior. These form with the added dynamics that become the trines and the kite formations that I already described. Also, August 9th, 12:54 a.m. So it's happening before the Mars opposite Neptune, but I wanted to make sure those were together, the Saturn and Neptune one. So August 9th at 12:54 a.m., there's a full moon in Aquarius. I describe this is a full expression of society's structures in the middle of the night. Just a few minutes after midnight, we shall feel the culmination of revolutionary interdependence. August 10th, 5:28 a.m., Mars 2 degrees of Libra trines Pluto at 2 degrees of Aquarius. Again, this is part of the kite. This is part of the grand trine. Mars is out here. Uranus, Pluto, it's trining both. This is the exact moment at 2 degrees, 12 minutes where Mars and Pluto are in exact trine. But like I said, 5th through the 14th, we're going to be feeling it. But this dynamic is the masculine in a relationship is aware of the transformation happening in society. How do we create balance in our relationships from the masculine perspective while honoring the extreme changes that society is enduring? August 11th, 12:30 a.m., Mercury goes direct. So we've all been feeling it. Retrograde's been happening since July 7th. It started at 15 degrees of Leo. I talked about this in the last report. And it's going to backtrack all the way to 4 degrees, 14 minutes of Leo. Then it stations direct, and that's on August 11th. So the culmination of introspection, of going within, of reevaluating what our hearts, Leo, what our hearts want to tell our minds, Mercury, right? We got to review and now do over our mind's consideration of our ego, our creativity, our self-expression, our passions. Those have all been in review, and now we get to apply that review. Also August 11th at 8:31 p.m., Saturn at 1 degree, 12 minutes of Aries, sextiles Uranus. Yeah. Uranus was here, Saturn and Neptune are here. This is the exact at 1 degree, 12 minutes of Aries and 1 degree, 12 minutes of Gemini. So the forms and structures, the rules and limitations that we are imposing on the masculine warrior dynamic are aligned with the mental upgrade that we are all experiencing, Uranus and Gemini. Rebellious ingenuity and radical insight is informing the hard work being done to contain the masculine in society. Also August 11th, later 10:29 p.m., Venus conjuncts Jupiter. Woo! Some relief. This is a good one. This is what we all basically been waiting for. just to catch our breath. So Venus comes together with Jupiter, 14 degrees of Cancer. So again, if you have your astrology chart, if you don't, go get it. Look at 14 degrees of Cancer. Venus and Jupiter come together there. And then what are they in relationship in the rest of your chart? What does it mean? What house is it happening in? So the expression of the lady, the goddess Venus, caring for others, in Cancer, and fighting for the vulnerable, protecting the child, protecting the vulnerable. This is like the expansion of that. This is like all of society is going to take this collective breath of nurturing and protecting the innocent, the vulnerable, the child within. This is a perfect day for like luxurious self-care, right?